In this video, I'm going to show you how to work with aperture on your Canon camera. The first thing that you want to do is turn your camera on, and then on the top of your camera in the shooting mode dial, you want to make sure that the AV setting is right next to the white line. So you need to make sure that that is done first, or you're not going to be able to get any of the rest of this to work. Also, whenever you're working with aperture, and specifically for the assignment that I'm giving you, your lens can be on autofocus or manual focus for pretty much any of these photos. It's completely up to you. Okay? After you turn the shooting mode dial to the AV setting, which is aperture priority, the next thing that you're going to want to do is to change your aperture. So when your camera is on and you're looking at the LCD screen, this part right here is showing you your f-stop. In order to change the f-stop, you just turn the jog wheel that's by your shutter button. Whenever we were in shutter priority, that was changing the shutter speed. But now that we are in aperture priority, that is going to change the f-stop. Changing your ISO is the same. You just click on the ISO button and then change your ISO. Okay, so jog wheel to change your f-stop, which is your aperture, and then the ISO is the same. Now it's important to note that whenever you're doing anything with aperture, the distance plays a key part. So whenever you're setting up your scene, you need to make sure that you have a good bit of distance between your subjects. So if you look at what I have here on the table, I have the necklace and then the two figurines. And look, there's a good bit of distance between each of these subjects. So if I put them too close together, so if I put them like super close together and brought that in here, then you're not going to get these photos to look the way they're supposed to. So you have to have some distance between there. Also, whenever you're taking these photos, you need to make sure that you're shooting, in most cases, closer to surface level. So whenever you have your camera, in this case, you want your camera to be down here. So that way there is definitely one subject that's closer to your lens, and that would be your foreground. And then you have one subject that's further from your lens, so that's the Tinkerbell figurine, don't judge me. And that would be your background. And then you have something between the foreground and the background, and that's your middle ground. And you need to make sure that whenever you're shooting them, you're shooting at surface level, because if you bring the camera up here and you try to shoot from a high angle or bird's eye, now the subjects are almost equal distance from the lens. And you're not going to get that depth of field that aperture is meant to show. So whenever you're setting up the photos for the aperture assignment, make sure that you have a good bit of distance between the subjects. And about what I have here is going to work out pretty well. Okay, so a quick review. In my shooting mode dial, it is set to AV. In this instance, I am using autofocus on my lens, but that's just because what I prefer, but you could use either one. And then to change the aperture, you just move the jog wheel here, and that's going to change your aperture. ISO is still the same. You can do this assignment looking through the viewfinder, but just to make it easier for this video, I'm going to show you this through the LCD screen. So for the foreground, if I want to focus on the foreground, I'm going to make sure that one of the items that are in my foreground, so in this case, the thing that is closest to the lens, is on a focal point, like I have right here. Now, to adjust my aperture, again, I'm going to move the jog wheel. Now, if I want to see a shallow depth of field, I am going to make that aperture number, that f-stop number, as low as possible. In this case, it's f4. Now, if you zoom out all the way, you can get that to go down to 3.5. But as soon as you zoom, you can see how that jumped to 4. So just kind of keep that in mind. Now, you could do 3.5 like that and then kind of scoot your camera in some. The foreground element doesn't have to be completely in frame, so I could kind of cut that necklace off like it is here, and it wouldn't be that big of an issue. Right? But I kind of like that framing right there. Okay, so 3.5 is going to give me a shallow depth of field. And you can see in the LCD screen that both of these figurines are out of focus. Okay, I'm using, that wasn't me hitting the shutter, that was just the LCD screen turning off. Okay, so I'm going to press the shutter halfway down. Okay, and I'm going to press, take the photo, and then that's the photo I get. So you can see that the necklace is nice and in focus, and then the other two figurines are out of focus due to shallow depth of field. All right, set that up again, and now I'm going to move the focal point to that Tinkerbell figurine all the way in the back. Press the shutter halfway down. Okay, now it's green, telling me the camera sees focus on it, and then I'm going to press the shutter the rest of the way down. And then to show you the difference, so here you can see the Tinkerbell is nice and in focus, and then there it completely changes. Okay, so that is the difference between focusing on the background and focusing on the foreground. If you want to focus on the middle ground, you would just move the focal point to your middle ground subject, press the shutter halfway down, and then take the photo. Okay, now that figurine is a little bit closer to the figurine in the background, so you'll see that it's not completely as out of focus as the necklace is. Also keep in mind that the necklace is giving me bokeh, so the highlights hitting the bright parts of the necklace from the lighting that I have in this room is giving me bokeh. So I'll kind of zoom in on that so you can see. You can see all that nice bokeh in there. So you don't have to use actual lights in order to get bokeh. Now, one of the things that I haven't necessarily pointed out is ISO. You would have to adjust your ISO settings if it wasn't allowing enough light. Now, I've been working with a really wide open aperture, like 3.5 and 4, so that is bringing in a lot of light. But if I needed to close down that aperture and shoot at, let's say, f22, I might have to bump up this, bump up my ISO a little bit more. Okay, so I'll do the middle ground picture. This is at f22. Okay, now one thing to notice is if I look at my camera, and you can hit the display button a couple of times and it's going to show you all of your camera settings. In this photo, let me do this. In this photo, look, this button, this right here is showing you your shutter speed. So you can see that that used a really low shutter speed in order to get this light to look nice. So there might be some cases where you still have to put your camera down on a steady surface and maybe get like a rag or a towel, like we did with the shutter speed assignment, in order to balance the lens. So there's a chance that you might end up using a slow shutter speed because the camera is setting the shutter speed for you to help compensate for light. In the last assignment, it was setting the aperture for you to help compensate for light. So that was just kind of a quick review of how to set your aperture and how to change it from a really shallow depth of field, which would be f3.5, to a really deep depth of field, which would be f22. And then again, changing your ISO is the same. For this part of the video, I want to show you how to do the starburst or sunburst effect. So what I'm going to do is the same way I was able to get the bokeh effect on the beads, and you can even see that the bokeh effect right now, I'm going to switch that up and I'm going to add a flashlight to the beads, and that's going to add for more of a specular highlight, and that's going to give me the sunburst effect. But in order to get the sunburst effect, you are going to have to adjust your aperture and have a closed down aperture. So that means a bigger number. So you could do this at f8 or f16. In my case, I'm going to do it at f22. Now your ISO can also affect that sunburst. So if you're having a hard time getting the sunburst, try doing a different ISO number. Okay, so let's try it out. So I'm going to move my focus point. So it's on the beads. I'm going to get a little bit closer. And then we're going to go ahead and shine the flashlight on the beads. There we go. So you can see that specular highlight there. Camera get focus. Okay, So if I go back into playback mode and I zoom in, look at that sunburst and sunburst/starburst effect. So you can see how it's really kind of pulling those light rays out. And again, I'm getting that because my aperture is a deep depth of field. So it's like f22, like I said, you could do f16, f8, but your ISO also makes a difference in this. In my case, it was ISO 3200. Keep in mind, it used a slower shutter speed, but I was on the table whenever I did this, so I think that that really helped to kind of keep it steady as well. The sunburst effect can be kind of tough to achieve, so don't get frustrated if you don't get it at first. Definitely try to get a flashlight and shine on things that already have a shiny surface. This can work on watches and glass, any type of glass material, any type of beading like this, anywhere where you see like these highlights already forming. Or just actual, like if you still have Christmas lights laying around, like sometimes people just use those to decorate all year. You can get sunburst on those. Pretty much anything that you can turn into bokeh can also be used for the sunburst effect. And that's pretty much all it would take.